So, Manny, getting started with your medical cannabis journey, in fact, not just getting started, but actually managing your journey is an important part. And you've been involved in working from a dispensary standpoint with patients for a long time. And actually, your company really does a lot to help people with their particular cannabis journey. Is that correct?
Absolutely. That's one of the biggest things that we deal with or contend with is helping people get their medical marijuana card here in the state of Florida, or if they should even get it. And we do that by going through the steps that you presented here on this presentation, which I applaud. It's quite amazing. And then we go into the details and the menage of it as well. It's definitely a journey. Getting started is the first steps. And usually when we consult with persons, it's usually just getting a feel for it. They're not making that decision just yet. And I always advise people, you don't have to have a medical marijuana card necessarily to walk into certain parts of a dispensary or to talk to an associate. You can always walk in, look around, see if it's something that's going to be fit for you, because it is definitely a way of life that takes some adjusting, because you're not getting a prescription saying, hey, you need to take this with or without food for this amount of time, for this frequency amount of time during the day. It's more of a journey where you're trying to figure things out for yourself and seeing what works or doesn't work with the guidance of subject matter experts such as ourselves.
Yeah. And that's why we highlight the fact that you're in control is really important because you can control. A lot of people are worried about getting stoned and not being cohesive. Really, if you're in control, you don't have that particular problem. And I think that that's what the dosing formula is really all about.
Yeah, and that's why journaling, I love the way the presentations end with that, because journaling is so important. Again, since you're not getting a dose prescribed to you per se,
Right.
you're pretty much getting given carte blanche to use certain routes of administration and to go shopping for what you feel is necessary for you.
Mhm.
In order to track that, at least in the beginning, you want to journal it and make sure you're keeping track, particularly with edibles, because it's
Mhm.
slower in the time of day, your environment, what you're eating, so forth, may play a role on that. With inhalants and things that are fast in and fast out, not
Mhm.
necessarily as important, but important nonetheless. Even myself, I've been using cannabis for over 20 years. Well, I can't say over 20 years. It was before the military. I was in the military for 20 years. And so for the past 7 or 8 years, I've been using and educating. I still journal, particularly when I'm using a new route of administration or right after what we call a tea break, a tolerance break, or a vacation, if you will. So make sure you download these materials that are available to you and take journals, ask questions. That's what we're here for.
Sure. Great. Manny, let's jump into some questions that were pre-submitted prior to our webinar. One of the questions are there any CEUs involved in this webinar? There really are not any credits that really are provided. We're just providing a webinar that's, you know, therefore in your interest and for your information. We're not accredited with any group that actually provides continuing education units that are out there. Unfortunately, we'd like to be able to do that in the future. But right now, this is mainly information only type of webinar. Let's jump into the second question. How do we get started to treat sleep with Parkinson insomnia? I think insomnia is something that is a real topic itself, whether it's with Parkinson's or not. But I think Parkinson's does actually affect it. But I think the answer to your question is being able to use the right terpenes to be able to address Parkinson's, and we can go through what those are. But I think the other issue is to understand Parkinson's is a condition that really takes, let's say, a month to almost 3 months before you'll start seeing some real benefits from using medical cannabis. That's been at least experience that I've seen. Your thoughts on that, Manny?
I would agree, Mark. I've dealt with very few, only a couple of consumers who deal with diagnoses such as this. Mainly, like you said, it's just insomnia. However, the recommendations with working with other physicians and from what I've seen from other patients, we always recommend anywhere from a 1-to-1 ratio product, meaning 50% CBD, 50% THC, or less THC, so a higher ratio of CBD. And with specific terpenes, as you suggested, the concern is, or the hurdle to get over is that the treatment is not necessarily going to make anything go away or heal you.
Hmm.
However, it does take some time for that CBD to build up in the system as a
Sure.
neuroprotectant and an anti-inflammatory. And as that builds up, you may get good sleep the first or second night, but the more you use it, the more benefit you're going to get from it. And that's anytime you're using CBD with any diagnosis.
Right.
But I would always recommend a one-to-one with a hybrid balance. So maybe some myrcene, some B-caryophyllene, some limonene, and some linalool, depending on the variants, will determine if it's going to be more sedative or not.
Sure.
But that's where I would start.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think the myrcene especially can help quite a bit. And again, don't let the fact that Parkinson's will cause insomnia, but I think insomnia is in general something that needs to be treated. And it's really important because the amount of sleep, the amount of rest you get, has a tremendous effect on your body positively. Let's put it that way.
And
So
one thing I left out, Mark, I think more to the point of the question is you don't have to smoke marijuana in order to get these effects. As
that's right.
suggested in the beginning of the presentation, you have 5 routes of administration that you can pick from. And I would always recommend probably a tincture or a fast-acting gummy or something that you can
Yeah.
chew or digest to get started so you can work slow or go slow and start low and go slow, excuse me.
Right. And I will point out one more time, Parkinson's is one of those conditions that really requires you to have some patience. It will take some time. It'll take a month or two for it to be able to really take effect, but it does work, and that's what the part about it. There's a Parkinson's organization here in Orlando that I've worked with, and it's kind of interesting to see the results that came out of it. A lot of people had some very positive results, but it does test your patience as to how long it definitely takes to kick in. We have a question about the different types of medical uh, marijuana strengths and potencies, which addresses what you were mentioning earlier. But I think what I'm going to do is take the next question and then let's jump into that. How's that sound? My goal is pain relief, improving sleep, not getting high. What are the best products and or ways of administration to that end? I think this is something that you hear quite a bit, don't you, man?
It absolutely is. Pain relief is one of the biggest diagnoses that we deal with. And I think that's primarily due to inflammation for the most
Mhm.
part. Pretty much everybody's dealing with some sort or some level of inflammation, whether it's troublesome or not is another story. Um, but again, there's different routes of administration. You have oral, sublingual, topical, edible, inhalation, and then you have the sixth, which is the smokable route, which is the flower or the buds.
Mhm.
If you're not looking to get euphoric or high, one-to-ones are a great way to start. Most of the time, you'll hear most dispensaries or bud tenders or whatever their title may be describe one-to-ones as maybe a couple of glasses of wine. You might get a little buzz or euphoric effect, but as you build up a tolerance, that won't be as let's say distracting, and you'll be able to use it more regularly, like for events or if you have to go to work or so forth. Your body kind of balances itself out when it gets that synergistic effect of THC and CBD, and then the terpenes, that whole entourage effect, which is why we like one-to-ones. But if
Right.
that's too much, you could always lift that ratio of CBD and have a higher CBD product, because CBD is non-euphoric. It actually mitigates the effect of THC, meaning if you were too euphoric, excuse me, you could take some CBD and it'll kind of dial it back down for you. So again, journaling, finding that balance in between is going to be the most beneficial for you.
Right. And I think also understanding that in these, I learned that when I had pain from my knee operation, I found out that really controlling the inflammation, getting that down, did a lot to relieve the pain. But that didn't mean that I didn't have pain from the operation. I did, but the culprit causing the high pain, or the most extreme pain, was really coming from inflammation. So a high CBD product, high ratioed CBD product, a product that was like 4 CBD to 1 THC, was something that worked very, very well for me, and it's something you may want to try. And that goes back to your uh, dosing. When you go through the dosing regime, you'll actually find what products work for you. Is it 4 to 1? Is it 1 to 1? Is it 9 to 1? Something that really is out there. And it may go the other way. You may need to have a product that's 1 THC or CBD and 4 THC. That might be one of the answers too. But I started with higher ratioed products that had higher ratios of THC than CBD, and I found out that what I really needed was the exact opposite of that. Now, Manny, when it goes back to, let's go to the last question here. Can we please explain the different types of medical marijuana strengths and potencies? Let's break this down a little bit different than the normal route because we talked about routes of administration before. There are products that work right away. So let me give you an example. Um, Vape pens, topicals. When you use those, they work right away. Then there are products that take anywhere between 20 minutes to 30 minutes to work. And those are products like your tinctures that you see that are there. And those will typically last between 4 to 6 hours that are there, where your fast acting products, like I mentioned, the topicals and the vape pens, they last about 2 hours, but they work right away. They work literally within 5 minutes. You have vapes, you have tinctures that really, when you start using them, they go underneath your tongue. And what they'll do is they'll last probably 4 to 6 hours, probably 4 hours, closer to 4 hours, but it'll take maybe 20, 30 minutes to work, depending again on your body and your consistency. Then there are products that take longer to work, and those are like the edibles and the gummies that could take anywhere from 30 minutes to 2 hours to work, but they'll work for up to 10 hours, which is really great if you want to get a good night's sleep. About an hour before you go to bed, grab yourself a gummy, grab yourself a brownie, whatever. But I think that helps quite a bit. But I think, Manny, breaking it down by the time frame also really helps, because I think people don't realize that, again, gummies don't work right away, and you really shouldn't really pop them like Skittles.
No, absolutely. To that point, Mark, the modality or the different route of administration you take may play a role in the potency or the effect that you're actually going to get from that product.
Mhm.
So as you were explaining, the flower is the most basic product. And what I like to suggest to any consumer or any clients that I'm working with is that it's all exactly the same thing. It's a matter of how it was processed, all naturally with the certificate of analysis here in the state of Florida, and then the modality of which it's meant to be used. So a vape pen, 1 to 2 puffs off of a vape pen should be equitable to about a half to a full, maybe half-gram joint.
Mhm.
So that's the difference in the potency. And because of that, your tolerance is going to build accordingly, which is why, as I suggested before, we need to take tolerance breaks or vacations from the product for about a week or two, or as tolerated, to reset our endocannabinoid system.
Right.
So it's all about the modality. It's all about what you're looking for. It's not just the THC percentage. It's about how you're going to take it. The environment you're in could play a role in it, because it does work on the mind a little bit. It's not psychoactive. I think that scares people, Mark, when they say psychoactivity.
Yeah.
I like to use euphoric or intoxicating, because it's basically the same essence of alcohol, just not as damaging as alcohol,
Well, I think
if at all.
contrasting it to alcohol, people who drink alcohol, they get excited. They go out. For example, I was talking to a highway patrolman, and we were talking about the difference between cannabis and alcohol. And I said, somebody who drinks alcohol gets in a car and wants to go race down the road. The guy who drinks cannabis basically cruises down the road, gets on a couch, and goes to sleep. I think there's a big difference between the two.
Yeah,
Your body
absolutely.
handles it and acts differently. But I think that's really, really important to understand that you will feel the effect, but it's not going to be. It's something that's easier to manage than alcohol. I think, at least from my experience.
To the last point on that piece, as far as the potency and strengths, Mark, there's one thing I wanted to point out as far as dosing, and Amy mentioned it in the presentation with the biphasic effect. One thing that I always find with any of the clients that I'm working with is that they, especially the ones using edibles, or particularly the ones using edibles and gummies or cookies, suggest that, hey, I took half a cookie or half a gummy or half of something or a quarter of something, and it was perfect. And then I took the other half the next night, and it was too much or too little or
Yeah.
so forth. The reason I mention that is because one big point is that there's only one product in the state of Florida that I'm aware of right now, and that's under the brand of Wana,
Hmm.
WANA, that actually has their product homogenized. And what that means is that you can actually cut it in half or in quarters and know that you have an equal part of medicine in each piece. Whereas anything else on the market right now, if you cut it in half or in quarters, you don't know where that medicine sits. So be
Right.
very cautious of that when you're trying to journal or dose yourself.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. And actually, when people make, for example, brownies, one of the things you got to be careful of is make sure you mix it and really, really mix it thoroughly, because there's many cases where people don't do that, and part of the brownie will, get you higher than a kite, and the other part won't do anything for you. Just
And
dizzy.
then and then you have to have even heat distribution so you get proper decarboxylation. There's a science behind this. It's not as simple as many would perceive it to be.
Sure, sure. The question that we have here is, when and where will you be in the New York market? And if not soon, do you have any recommendations for anything like your business? Well, if you're talking about my business, which is really a business where I am doing education, I educate, and this broadcast goes nationally. We are on YouTube, which is a national brand. So we are actually having efforts right now where we're branching out to the East Coast, we're branching out to the West Coast. So our business is really uh, being webinars. It's easy enough to be across the market. But I do think that if you're looking for part of the business that I do work with, which is MMTC, Medical Marijuana Treatment Clinics of Florida, there are those organizations that are in New York, and we can actually help you find some of those. I know, Manny, you have a business, the Blunt Joint. I think you're pretty much located in the Southeast. Is that correct?
That is, I do reach out across the nation depending on the inquiries we do have. I was on a broadcast or a webinar, if you will, up in New York, Staten Island, called The Set
Mhm.
from Alfinez. So you can look that up. A little shout out to my brother there. But yeah, we work nationwide. Anybody who inquires, I don't mind doing the research for the state that you're in if I'm not already aware, and helping you understand the jargon, if anything else.
And I think the other point is we work with a number of dispensaries. Sotera is listed here, but also we have a very close association with a company called Air, AYR, and they are in New York. They have dispensaries that are there, and I think it's important to point out that if you're looking for our dispensary partner that I work with, I like working again with Air and Sotera. Why? Because these are companies that have terpenes in their ratioed products. There's a lot of dispensaries out there that have ratioed products that really don't have the terpene profiles that we're looking for to help with the various medical conditions. Because if you can match a terpene profile to your condition, you'll be getting the medicine that you really need to be able to help your condition that's really there. Um, so I think that's kind of an interesting little topic there. We had another question that came up, and that is, can you hold a medical marijuana permit and own a gun? You've never heard this question, have you, Manny?
Oh, I have. I get it quite often. I had it myself. It's all the
If I don't hear
time.
this on a monthly basis, I'm not doing my job.
Well, just about any new patient that comes through the doors or inquires, that's probably one of the top 3 to 5 questions they come out with is, can they own a permit and own a gun, marijuana permit and a weapon? And if you don't mind, I'll go ahead and jump into that,
Oh,
Mark.
please.
That the question up front is yes, you can. Um, I'm not going to go into the details besides that Nikki Fried, who used to be our commissioner, was a medical marijuana card holder and a gun owner as well. She had her concealed weapons license, which is no longer a thing here in Florida per se. But the same laws apply. So like if you have your weapon legally with you, you're not going to be drinking alcohol. You're not going to be under pharmaceutical intoxication or prescription drugs that can impair your judgment. You're not going to have medical marijuana or any marijuana or other drugs on you. So the same laws apply. You want to be very cautious, very careful, because same thing, if you have to discharge your weapon, you're going to be blood tested and so forth. And that's a gray area when it comes to marijuana because that could be in your system for 30 or more days, considering how frequently you use or which products you're using in your diet. So the answer is yes. If you're using medical marijuana or marijuana is on your person or in your vicinity, do not have your weapon with you.
Yeah. It's like alcohol, same kind of deal.
Mhm.
Those really don't play together very well. I did two comments I do want to make. One comment is that uh, there have been federal laws that have been challenged. There's been three particular cases where that have made it legal to be able to use medical cannabis and also own a gun and buy a gun. Although I have to tell you right now, the process to be able to purchase a gun when you're in the process of doing that, you do have to mention that you're using medical cannabis, and they can refuse your purchase. Just tell you that right up front. There's laws that are and there's legal cases that are being put in place to basically get rid of that. And it's actually favorable to the fact that you're going to get a gun. But again, it's depending on how the state and how the states are interpreting it. I would just be very careful. Again, you can own a gun. I'm not sure we would recommend that you can buy a gun. Again, that's up to the state. And there's a lot of that water is just moving very quickly. It's hard to read the tea leaves on that one. Your thoughts, Manny?
I completely agree.
Yeah, on that one. Great. Let's jump into some live questions that came up in a couple of webinars that are there. I've been using medical marijuana for almost a year in an attempt to alleviate my rheumatoid arthritis (RA). So far, nothing relieves the pain, but it does help me sleep. Any suggestions? This is a case where really reducing the inflammation makes a lot of sense, and really having a high ratio CBD product helps. I mean, a lot of RA patients that ratio, using high ratioed CBD products, also help you get some sleep. Man, you've seen this problem before, haven't you?
I have both when I worked in a dispensary and currently working with the blunt joint. And so this is a multifaceted attack, if you will. So depending on what you're using, and I would always recommend getting a consultation at any dispensary you're shopping at or all the dispensaries you're shopping at to compare notes, if you will.
Hmm.
But I always recommend somewhere around a 1-to-1 or higher in THC, depending on your actual RA pain. And I would also recommend a topical that is not necessarily transdermal, but depending on if it's all your joints, if it's just a couple of joints, if it's depending if you're still active and working out, do you still have to go to work? And if so, what are you doing at work? A lot of this plays into it. So it's not just as I was mentioning before, a quick blanket, here's an ibuprofen, 800 milligrams. See
Right.
how it does reduce inflammation. Call me in 2 weeks or come back and visit me in 2 weeks. This is going to be that journey. But again, 1-to-1 or higher in THC, and that could be in any route of administration. And the main terpene I would be looking for, whether it's going to be indica, meaning more for evening time in the couch, or a
Mhm.
sativa, more uplifting, is B-caryophyllene. That is a known analgesic or pain reliever, and it's also the only known terpene to react with both CB1 and CB2 receptors, which makes it twice as effective.
Right. And this goes back to the point of, if you're not using a product that has the right terpene profile, like you said, we mentioned beta caryophyllene, which can help you with your pain. If your product is not high in that or it doesn't contain that, you're taking cannabis, but it's not going to be addressing. It doesn't have the medical value for your particular condition. This is where dealing with people like Manny, myself, and or Manny, you also have a secret sauce here. You can get consultations at your local dispensary. Is that correct?
Absolutely. You could go to any local dispensaries, no appointment required. It's almost a lost trademark, if you will, because before COVID, that was a real personable thing that happened at all dispensaries. And since COVID, that kind of faded in the background. And now most clients or most consumers will come in kind of afraid to ask questions or don't know what questions to ask.
Right.
But always remember, you can ask for a consultation, private or out in the open, depending on the type of dispensary you're at. And they'll be happy to help you. They'll probably be very excited to do so because they love to share their knowledge with you.
Hmm. Right. That's really there. That's a good point. Um, so good tip, consultations. Now let's go into Carolyn's questions here. She says, I realize the terpenes make a big difference when looking for a specific product that will help your issue. But so many dispensaries do not tell you what terpenes are in their product, or you have to literally scroll through all their products and go through the descriptions to see the terpenes, and many times they aren't even there. Any suggestions? Manny, you've run into this, you've had this question, you've worked for a dispensary. Your thoughts on this?
I have the same trouble, Carolyn, as you do, and as a lot of consumers do. Each company kind of does their way or their terpene presentation differently, and that's due to the vertical integration, and that'll come later in the seminars. But what I like to do is first thing is categorize what product you're looking for. So again, the three very generic categories are indica, couch sleeping, sativa or like sativia, I think is the sugar substitute, uplifting, and then hybrid, which is right in the middle.
Mm,
Once you find the products, as you could categorize it, every dispensary makes that very easy because that's the easiest way for them to get the products out in that category. Once you get into that category, instead of searching for the terpenes that you need to find, you can actually kind of click the products you want, put them in your basket, and then look at those for the terpenes you're looking for, because now you've already limited what you're kind of interested in. And then now you're looking for the terpenes instead of going out in the woods with a blind map trying to figure out
right.
which ones are what.
That's
I
good.
find that to be the best. I know most dispensaries are trying to work towards that. Terpenes became very relevant to dispensaries in the past year, although we've probably been screaming about it for the past 3 years or so since the whole program started.
Sure.
You can also always ask for a certificate of analysis at the dispensary,
Mhm.
whether they print it out for you per your request, or if you trust them to read off to you to save paper, which is more beneficial. I think they can tell you what terpenes or what's there. That's where that consultation comes into play, especially if you ask for a private one, because they can bring a tablet or a computer into that room and go through it a lot quicker than you kind of trying to figure out how their website works, then trying to figure out how the terpenes come into play, then trying how to look those terpenes up. So take the time, ask those questions, go to a dispensary. Again, you can always reach out to us at the Blunt Joint or Marc at MMTC, I believe.
And it's important to point out every dispensary here in the state of Florida has to tell you what's in the product. They have to have a COA that's really out there. So the question has become, how do they make these more, let's just say, available? How do they make it easier to look at? And then more importantly, when you're looking for a particular type of terpene like beta caryophyllene, how do you be able to find it? I think, Manny, your tip of just grab a set of products that you're interested in and sort through those before you sort through the whole catalog makes a lot of sense. Really.
And if I may, I want to make sure I don't demonize the dispensaries. Keeping up with those COAs and the terpenes for every batch of product that comes out is very, very difficult. That's pretty much like asking Chiquita Banana to always keep track of every little detail of their bananas that goes to every location
Right.
that changes every batch or every grow or every season. So it's very detailed, it's very complicated. I only ask that you give the associates there at the dispensary some time. If they're not quite aware, they'll ask for assistance from their management staff, and I'm sure they'll be able to assist you. But it's not always going to be exact depending on the batch, because that changes literally daily, if not weekly.
Well, this is a botanical product. So although, and what you mean by that is, if you're looking for beta caryophyllene, it'll be in the product. That's not going to be deleted from that product. The question is how much? Is it 0.3, 0.25, 0.32? And I think that's the ratio that they're looking for. So it makes the complicated is because it's botanical, every product is different. Like you mentioned, every banana has a different vitamin profile. Again, they have the same vitamins, but the question is based on where they're grown and how they're grown. Organics are more contain more vitamins than the ones that aren't. So anyway, it's the same kind of thing with cannabis. I know there's a lot of growers, and they spend a lot of time working, and they're very professional in what they do. They take pride in the product. But I think the question is being able to get a COA that's right down to the last 0.00 whatever is really the key. I think that's what's been the real issue that's really down there. But don't
And
worry, the
so
product does have beta caryophyllene.
And what I do is it's not so much, even though those percentages really do matter. There's four terpenes that I really look for as far as categorically, if you will.
Mhm.
So if I'm looking to relax or go to sleep, I'm looking for beta myrcene to be number one, possibly followed by linalool. And with that being said, myrcene also allows more THC to get to the brain a little bit easier and more rapidly. So you don't necessarily need those super high THC percentages on indica products heavy in myrcene. If you're looking for something during the day more uplifting, I would look for limonene being the primary terpene or the one with the most or highest percentage, followed by B-caryophyllene, and myrcene and linalool somewhere towards the bottom or non-existent. But those you would want higher THCs. And then if you want something for pain or somewhere in the middle, that's not going to be too indica or too sativa, typically B-caryophyllene is going to be your number one agent or your number one
Yeah.
terpene, if you will, on that list.
Right. Question. Let's jump into that last question here, which is what is best to use if I have asthma? Now, that's a excellent question because I know when people have asthma, their main concern they have is putting anything into their lungs. And I do have to tell you, um, when you have asthma, you use a bronchial inhaler. And there are bronchial inhalers that are available for cannabis. I know that Move, for example, has a bronchial inhaler that you can pick up, and it works very effectively. That was designed for people with asthma that are really out there. But I also want to point out that when you take a look at smoking medical cannabis, it's not the same as smoking a cigarette. Cigarette contains a very high concentration of carcinogens. There is carcinogens in anything that you smoke. Let's put it that way. But the concentration of that with cannabis is a lot less. And I suggest actually using vapes if you want to smoke than using the blunts themselves. But if you have asthma and you really want to protect your lungs, you have other ways of working. You have sublinguals, you have oral, and you have topical. Your thoughts on that, Manny?
I completely agree. And I would love to have more of a conversation with you, Deborah, because I'm not sure if you're using cannabis to help assist with asthma or because you have asthma, you're looking for other routes to treat other diagnoses. However, I completely agree with vaping flower. Vaping flower is a beautiful thing. It leaves a byproduct that you can sprinkle in your coffee or in your ice cream. So now it becomes an edible as well because you didn't quite burn it all the way down. There are some useful properties still there, particularly CBN. Um, you could use topicals, you could use even tinctures can be used as a topical depending on what you're trying to treat and what oils are used as the base. So
Yeah,
there's a lot of options out there for you, Deborah. I hope this kind of enlightens that, and feel free to reach out if you have more questions about it.
right. That's really good. And I do think yeah, the terpene profiles that you're really looking are myrcene, again, going back to beta caryophyllene. And I think with asthma, we'd be looking at something like limonene. That would really help.
Well, two other ones really good for that is going to be eucalyptol and alpha pinene.
Yes.
However, if you're dealing with anxiety, you want to be cautious because eucalyptol and alpha pinene, particularly paired with limonene, can really induce that anxiety a little bit more until you become tolerant or used to it.
Sure.
There was one thing I really wanted to make everybody aware of. MMTC of Florida is one of the, by far, the most knowledgeable and informative clinics I've ever worked with. So I appreciate you letting me pair with you. And the reason I mention that is because working in other clinics myself and working in a dispensary, hearing the complaints from consumers basically about what the clinics provide compared to what is the responsibility of the medical marijuana use registry.
Hmm.
And one thing I want to point out on that is that the MMTCs, the clinics, if you will, are not the approving authorities for the medical marijuana license. That is from the state. All they do is put in the recommendation. And once that license is issued, pretty much everything from there that doesn't have to do with your demographics, your email, your age, your address, stuff like that, which can be controlled by you, is controlled by the state. So please take the advantage that MMTC provides, particularly in the education they do when setting up your medical marijuana license, and the booklets and resources they provide, because it is definitely a journey. Don't forget to journal. And then lastly, in the presentation, we were talking about who can get a medical marijuana card. I do want to point out that under 18, adolescents can get a medical marijuana card. It takes two recommendations. So one will
Right.
probably be from your primary or specialty care. And then the second one would be the medical marijuana doctor. It is a process.
Right.
It does take some coaching and some advisement. I would recommend reaching out if you're ever looking to work in that situation.
Okay. Great. Now your son actually got a medical marijuana card. So you have
Absolutely,
experience
yeah.
with that. So what I
He
want to
gets
point
it for
out is it can
epilepsy.
happen. People can get cards for their kids.
Yes, he gets it for epilepsy. Fortunately, he'll be turning 18 this year. So that's a benefit. And he got a good coach, I like to think. So I think he'll be beneficial and do his own thing and manage what he's dealing with.
There you go. Good. And I do want to point out that we have patient education with our not only our medical marijuana aware webinars. You notice we have ones coming up on how to navigate your medical marijuana journey, the methods of consumption. We have live seminar, which Manny and I will be in the villages on the 6th of February. Then we're going to talk about how to craft it, how to use relief for various conditions, talk about edibles, and then we're going to do a very special webinar for veterans and also for first responders. We'll be doing that on the 9th of March. We're going to be talking about that to help people in that area. And then we're going to wrap up this week, this quarter's webinar series by just having and taking a lot of the questions and being able to take questions from you and talk about what we can do to be able to move forward. So I think if you want to get a card, we recommend medical marijuana treatments in Florida. If you want to use products, you're looking for products themselves, I highly recommend Air, and I also recommend Cetera. I think those are the two top dispensaries that I work with. I like their products. I've worked with them for a number of years, and let's just say they've provided the product quality that we've really been able to look for. And naturally, we'd like to be able to get your feedback on this particular webinar. We appreciate everybody's hanging in there tonight. I know it's been kind of bad weather outside, but hopefully we've helped you be able to get some information to help you get your life back. So Manny, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Your comments were very helpful.
Thank you, Mark. It's always a pleasure. I'd just like to leave with one last note, and that's just to say that if you are getting started, remember that this is something that you don't have to continue if you feel uncomfortable with it, although that's very unlikely. Getting your card doesn't really hold you into anything in particular, and there's no penalty if that card expires or if your recommendation expires, and then you decide maybe 2 or 3 months later, you know what? that did make a difference in my life. I want to start back up. There's no startup penalties. There's no expiration penalties from the state or anything like that. The fees remain the same based on the clinic you go to.
Right. And I have to tell you, look, I'm using cannabis on a daily basis because I have 7 herniated discs in my neck and I've had my knee operations. I've in pain and I have inflammation. And this is the best option that I've seen. There is no pharma drug or anything else that I've seen that's really helped me do that. But it's not that I'm addicted to cannabis. What I'm addicted to is getting rid of my pain. Let's put it that way, and getting my mobility back.
100%.
Um, so I think, and I found a way to do that. So, if I need to do a rain dance to get it to rain, that's what I'm going to do. And if, in this case, if this is what I need to do to get rid of my pain and inflammation, there you go. So I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. Manny, I want to thank you for your contribution. I know it helped quite a bit. And I know we have more webinars coming up. Please join us for those. So everybody, please stay warm. I know that right now that's a bit of a challenge, but we hope to see you next week for the methods of using medical cannabis. And thank you very much for joining us.